And I believe that the church is called to be prophetic, but you cannot be prophetic and partisan at the same time.
Yeah.
You cannot be prophetic and partisan at the same time. Today is Monday, January 15th, 2024. It is MLK Day. It is also my father's 72nd birthday, so happy birthday to you, Dad. We just got done having dinner with him and Mom and had a wonderful time. I have a very important conversation I'm going to share with you here in a moment, a conversation on faith and politics, the church and politics specifically, and why I typically do not address political issues. This is really the beginning of me beginning to address political issues. I talk about why I don't address political issues so that I can begin to address political issues, hopefully in a healthy and engaging and life-giving way. This is actually going to be the beginning of a discussion that's going to continue for several episodes. In the next episode, I hope to engage the topic of Israel and Palestine, and I'll engage several other such issues. But today, we're going to begin the discussion. But before we get there, I want to give you a little bit of a context. I think it's important. Last night, my brother, Josh, who lives in D.C., he and his family, sent us a text of a little screenshot that he and his family were watching this movie called Polly. This movie, Polly, was from 1989. Me and my brothers, Josh and Charles, used to watch it all the time when we were little kids. We probably watched that movie 100 times when we were little kids. Starring Keisha Knight Pulliam and Felicia Richard. It's about a little girl whose parents died in a car accident. She comes to this town, and she basically transforms the whole town. So Josh, he's like, me and my kids are watching the movie. And I thought, oh, this is great. So Charles, he's in Alabama. He goes, oh, we're going to watch it. And I said, oh, Alethea, come on. Let's you and I watch it. So Alethea and I sat up and watched it. And we got to the end of the movie, and it hit me differently this time because I hadn't watched this movie through since I was maybe a teenager. What hit me this time was what the movie was actually about. What it was actually about. There's a scene at the end of the movie where this bridge that had burned down between two communities years earlier gets rebuilt because of this little girl, Polly. And these two communities, one black and one white, they come together and they meet on this bridge and they embrace each other. And it dawned on me that that's what the whole movie was about, that this little girl was a bridge builder, that she comes into this town where everyone is against one another. Everybody's at each other's throats. And she just starts building bridges between people who are adversaries naturally. She's a peacemaker. She makes friends out of enemies. And I thought, as I watched it last night, I saw this last scene and I just burst into tears. It just hit me that this little girl was so Christ-like, that her role was so Christ-like, that her ministry was reconciliation. And I thought, that's what our ministry is supposed to be. But it's not. And so in today's episode, in my conversation with my good friend Joshua Manns, this is going to be a stream in my About the Benjamin podcast that I'm going to call PB and J. So I'm PB, Pastor Benjamin. J is Joshua Manns. So this is our first installment of PB and J. We got several. We have these deep conversations all the time, and we've said for years, it'd be great for us to just start recording these conversations and putting them out there. So I hope you enjoy this. This is the first episode of the PB and J stream on the About the Benjamin podcast, talking about politics in the church, what's gone wrong, and guys, we can't fix it until we identify the problem. So hope this helps. Hope this encourages you. Let's get after it.
We got a late start. I thought I was going to be back by 11, but we didn't leave until substantially after 9.
Oh, no
So
problem. I got home at
severe.
11, but I had to shower and shave. So
Yeah, I didn't even have a chance to shave. If I do that, it's just game over.
hmm I went to men's Bible study looking gruff.
Yeah, Scruff McGruff, Chicago, Illinois, 60652. You can help take a bite out of crime.
But see, you can hit like the gruff the grizzled look looks good on you. It looks almost for me. I just look homeless.
No, that's when you told me I look like Kimbo Slice. I'll never forget waking up with that echoing in my mind the next day. That's how you know it's a solid roast. It's the first thought on your mind the next day. Kimbo.
That's hilarious. All right, so did you have something else on your mind that you wanted to talk about today?
No, let's keep it. Let's keep it on the subjects. I forgot what you already mentioned already, but let's keep it
Politics.
politics. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had some thoughts about that. I very seldomly talk about my political positions, and I have reasons for that. First reason is I learned a valuable lesson during the pandemic.
First of all, wow.
And that the lesson I learned during the pandemic is that nobody's listening in America.
Right.
So communicating your political perspective it's just a dog whistle for people who already agree with you.
Yes.
Maybe it gives them some more ammunition against the other side, but it doesn't actually change anyone because there's no discourse in America anymore.
Wow.
Right? Secondly, because that's the case, any political discourse on my behalf would simply alienate people that I'm called to minister to who have a different political perspective than me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because by and large, even in the church, people have zero capacity. Most people have zero capacity to hear a political perspective that doesn't agree with them.
All right.
Now, I have found that behind closed doors, having conversations with people that I know more intimately has been fruitful.
Mm-hmm.
People with whom even I disagree with politically on some things, because I only do that with individuals that I know are open-hearted and open-minded about conversing with people that they love and know that love them. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation, there's some meaning to that because maybe there's things that I'm thinking about wrong. Mm. And maybe there's things they're thinking about wrong, and we can actually help each other pursue truth in a more intentional way. But that's not necessarily the case by and large in the body of Christ in America today. Mm. But I think the biggest problem that I see is that today, in our culture today, American politics is almost exclusively, almost completely driven by outrage.
Right.
It's like the primary strategy for both sides of the aisle, is to put your finger on something the other side of the aisle is doing, exaggerate it to the point of cartoonishness, and then manipulate your base into being outraged about it. So every day when you turn on any of the political pundits on either side, all you're hearing is, here's what you should be outraged about today. Mm. And once we become outraged, we stop hearing anything. You're not even dealing with human beings anymore.
Right.
There's no more nuance. And this justifies kind of ousting any type of historical particularities about any perspective. You don't have to know the particulars of any perspective You just have to know whether it's liberal or conservative. And if you're a liberal and it's conservative, then it's hogwash. And if you're a conservative and it's liberal, then it's hogwash. And so cross demonization is the political strategy of the day. And the saddest part of that is that the church is not only participating in that, Christians across America are not only participating in that, but we are the primary exemplars of it.
Mm-hmm.
We are the ones feeding into the outrage, creating the outrage. We are the primary ones who are outraged and communicating outrage. And I feel like, just my personal conviction is, not only is that not Christ-like, but we have a responsibility to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We have a responsibility to bless those who curse us, to love our enemies, to pray for those who despitefully use us. Like, this is how we show ourselves to be sons of our Father in heaven, who sends his rain on the just and the unjust.
Right.
And I just don't think we're doing a good job of that. And so for me, opening my mouth and communicating a political perspective feels like participation in this whole strategy of outrage, this whole culture of outrage, and I don't want anything to do with. And so I've been praying about, like, what are the alternatives?
All right, you bring up a bunch of points there that I think are worth talking about.
Mm.
I have a perspective on this.
Mm.
I think I wholeheartedly agree, particularly in America, but I actually think it's becoming a global phenomenon, if it's not already.
Mm.
There is no discourse.
Mm-hmm.
There's the intention of political discussions is to destroy rather than to synthesize. And I think that's part of the problem.
Right.
So, I mean, you see this even with what's going on very practically today in not even U.S. politics, global politics with Israel and Palestine, Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. The heels are deeply entrenched. And the intention of everything being said is to destroy rather than reconcile or synthesize some type of common ground of understanding about what even led to this.
Right.
Let alone whether what the actions that are being taken today are right on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's what even led to this. We can't even agree on a historical, factual context.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's the biggest sign that there is not an ability or even an intention to listen. So there's a problem that, quite honestly, I don't know how to solve. I don't think it's worth trying to solve. I think that there are underlying things that probably lead to that mentality that we can probably discuss at length. But another thing I heard you said was that you find yourself kind of reluctant to share your views because you might ostracize or, disconnect yourself from the people that you're supposed to reach and be a figure in some capacity of their life. I think so. The backhand of that is, you said the one-on-one discussions that you've had have actually been pretty fruitful.
Some of them, yes.
Some of them. I think that's just a function of your platform, because what your platform is, apart from your personal life, is one-way communication.
Mm.
It is not discourse.
Mm.
It is proclamation.
Mm.
And you cannot have a political discussion from the pulpit.
Mm.
You can't have it from a YouTube video that you put up outside of the comments that come in, right? Mm. When people feel like they're being talked to, the emotional entanglement that happens, you just get wrapped up in that. I think that is what prevents you from having the freedom to do that from the platform that you have. It's because, you know, you're an authority figure, whether that's an authority, spiritual authority that God has placed in the church, or a kind of subject matter expert authority for whatever other reason that you're placed in people's lives, or people are listening to what you have to say. And typically that authority manifests, the conversation is one way. Right? It's not to say that you wouldn't be open to following up, but by the time it comes to follow up, people have already made up their minds about you and what you said.
Right.
And that's just, it's a paradox that I think you have to contend with, given the platform that you have. It's almost a curse of celebrity of sorts. It's just, people will take your whole life and pick it apart to what they see from their lens as an outsider. And that just kind of is what it is in their minds, which is, it's a cop-out, because I think mature people would want to follow up and say, hey, you said some things that I don't understand or even agree with. Why? Like, maybe you can follow up on that. Like, or maybe, hey, can we grab coffee and figure out, like, what did you mean? Like, why in the world would you think that that's okay? Or why would you take that side?
Right.
Or haven't you heard about this? Like, all those things that would happen with me and you just sitting here talking, they're not going to happen.
That's true.
All right. So those are two problems that I actually don't feel like are problems that you need to solve.
Right.
I think they're things that we have to embrace and move forward with the context of knowing. But the outrage piece, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, so I think those two go together, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, okay, that clarifies kind of the kind of what I've been thinking in terms of what is the alternative to the politics of outrage.
Right.
And I had a great discussion over the last couple of days with a pastor friend of mine, and it was just a private chat, and a person I love and respect very much. But he made a comment about liberals and how they enable poverty. And my response was, I don't see poverty as a partisan issue. Poverty transcends partisanship. And he said, yes, but the liberals have a hidden agenda of destroying values. And one of the things that they enable is poverty. And he was responding to a particular video. He had actually sent me this video of these homeless people on the street in a particular city. And so I said to him, I can hear the outrage in your voice, but can I ask you a couple questions? And he said, sure. I said, my first question is, are you absolutely sure that the liberals, quote unquote, are the cause of that particular manifestation of poverty? And if so, how are you sure? Like, what specific actions did which specific liberals take in order to enable this specific manifestation of poverty? If you don't have an answer to that question, if you can't answer that question, then your outrage is basically basically you've eaten the propaganda that they've given you. That the conservative side has given you all of this propaganda about how liberals enable poverty. So every time you see poverty, you think, here's what the liberals are doing to our country. I said, but if that's the case, how do you explain the fact that Dallas, Texas has a higher poverty rate than San Francisco or Los Angeles? That Tulsa, Oklahoma has a higher poverty rate than San Francisco or Los Angeles. The poverty rate in Dallas is 18%, but in San Francisco, it's only 10%. You know what I mean? So You're comparing a conservative run city and a liberal run city, and the poverty rate, there's still poverty. They're both dealing with poverty.
Right.
And so for me, escaping the politics of outrage, outrage cannot survive particularities.
Right.
That is, when you start talking about particulars instead of generals,
Yeah.
and saying all liberals, as if you're talking about all liberals everywhere, in all places and all times. Or are you speaking of conservatives as if conservatives are a monolith? All conservatives in all times and in all spaces have done this, when neither conservatism nor liberalism are monoliths.
Right.
Which person did what, and what did it lead to? You can actually critique anything by simply being specific and being factually clear. You know what I mean?
But that's no fun.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, I remember you told me something really interesting before as well. It was either 4 or 8 years ago, leading up to one of those elections, and you said, I think you actually mentioned this from the pulpit at one point, that it is wrong to characterize someone who you even think is evil as being completely evil, or someone who you think is good as being completely good.
Right.
And that happens so often. Like we take 1 or 3 or 5 qualities of something or someone, and we say the whole thing is good and perfect. Or we say the whole thing is evil, demonic. These people have a hidden agenda. There's a conspiracy. That is something that I think culturally we embrace more now than ever. And maybe it's because I'm growing up and seeing this with my own too. Maybe it's always been this way. But we embrace the extremes so readily.
Right.
And I think there's something within us that's reaching for an absolute answer. Something that can be easily a function that can easily be applied to any set of inputs.
Right.
We don't want to have to do the hard work and say, you know what, this function is complicated, it's messy. It's going to take a whole series of inputs, and you're going to have to do a ton of deduction and reasoning to get to the root of this. It's too much work.
Right.
So we do want people to give us propaganda. We ask for it.
Yep.
We ask for it. We pay for it when we fund things.
Yep. And we don't realize that propaganda is a dehumanizing process. Because if you can point the finger at a group of people and say that they are all wrong, 100% wrong, and 100% evil, then you no longer actually perceive them as human beings.
Right.
They're just evil. You just perceive them as evil and wrong and bad and wicked.
Right.
And then the other side of it is, if you look at another group of people and say these people are all right, 100% right, and 100% good, and there's nothing, they've never done anything wrong, and they've never made a mistake, you've still dehumanized that person. And now you've made them an object of worship. But either way, when you take away nuance, you rob us of our humanity, because human beings are highly nuanced. You know, I just watched, my wife and my daughter and I, we just watched Equalizer 3 last night. Have you seen it?
Not the third. I've seen the first 2.
I actually really enjoyed it. I heard bad reviews about it, but I actually really enjoyed it. But there's one line where somebody asks him, "Are you a good man?" And he says, "I don't know." So he's in trouble and he gets saved. And he's like, "Did we just save a good man?" He says, "I don't know." Right. And then at the end, he's like, "Why did you save me? I told you I didn't know." And he goes, "Only a good man would say, I don't know." You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
I can't say I'm completely good. I can't say I'm completely evil. I know my stuff. I know the stuff that God's still working on in me. And that's what I love about Scripture. You know, you and I were talking in the car about this the other day, how like the Bible tells the story of David and doesn't whitewash the fact that he kills Uriah and takes his wife.
Yeah.
You know what
It
I mean?
doesn't
It's
throw
like,
any punches.
like,
That the verse that stood out to me was because David, it used a strong word. Was it despised the
yes,
Lord?
yeah, right,
Can you imagine David, this like the Old Testament figure that people look to, David,
right,
despising the Lord?
right. I mean, this kind of like falls into the doctrine of inspiration of Scripture.
Hmm.
Like, from a human perspective, shouldn't the authors of the Old Testament,
Hmm.
shouldn't they have whitewashed all of those stories and just created a piece of religious propaganda to
Exactly.
prop up their God and their people and make them look like the best
Exactly.
people in the ancient world and the best religion in the ancient world? Why did they not give us a piece of religious propaganda? Why did they give us real stories about people who made real mistakes? You know, even their greatest
Some of the
heroes.
worst mistakes you can imagine.
Exactly.
Murder,
I never killed nobody and took his wife.
man.
You know, and that's
Yeah.
setting the bar pretty low. You know? But at least I ain't killed nobody and took his wife. but but the fact that this is like perhaps the greatest figure in Old Testament, to the extent that the Messiah himself, the Son of
Mhm.
God, is called the Son of David.
Yeah.
When you want to whitewash that line,
Yeah. That's a really interesting thing, is that when we tell stories, this is what I was getting to, even with like the history of how something came about. We it's not that we have selective memory. I think if we choose to, we remember. We just selectively tell stories. We omit things. We have selective omission, and the recalling of what's happened
hmm,
and how we got here.
hmm,
And that's what leads to the extremes.
right,
Is um if you and I had a falling out,
hmm,
I've known you for what, 11 years, something
hmm,
like that, right?
yeah,
Almost 11 years.
hmm,
If you and I had a falling out and I was telling somebody about how I had a falling out with you, and all I did was focus on these terrible moments that I had with you and like the wrong that I felt that you did toward me, and I ignored all of the good things that we had up to those 11 years, and why it was so painful to me that what you did to me hurt me the way that it hurt me,
hmm,
right? If I ignore all the little things that lead up to that, what I've actually done is reinforce the bitterness in my own heart.
right,
And I've said, no, you know what? F that. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to immediately go all the way toward validating hate.
right, right,
I'm not going to leave any room toward, you know what? This was painful. And
right,
I wish we could have like maintained this relationship,
exactly.
but it didn't work out. Maybe one day it will. You don't
Right.
ever hear that type of conversation or narrative, the arc of the story going toward, I really hope for resolution one day, you know?
Exactly. I mean, we keep talking about peace in the Middle East.
Right.
There's no peace in America.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a sad state of affairs when the average American would say that their greatest enemy
Hmm.
is not someone on the other side of the world, an organization on the other side of the world who has explicitly stating that they exist to kill Americans, but that their greatest enemy is one of their own
Yeah.
countrymen of the opposing political persuasion.
Right.
I mean, that is crazy. We don't see that we're destroying ourselves,
Yeah.
that we're
It's
our
really,
that we're on and the thing is, the key is this doctrine of outrage, it has to be repeated daily,
hmm.
because if you allow yourself to become human, if you just turn it off and stop listening to the pundits for just a few weeks and then just start talking to some folks on the other side of the aisle
Right.
and just let them be human beings, you can't hate them.
Yeah.
You can't, they become human beings to you,
Mm-hmm.
And once someone becomes a human being to you, you have to actually take their perspective seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You have to actually listen to them. And, it's funny. I mean, that was an exercise where when I was studying at Fuller Seminary and I had to read Schleiermacher and I had to read some of the 19th century liberals. I had to read Bultmann and some of
Mm-hmm.
the neo Orthodox scholars and theologians of the early 20th century. And, I mean, I had kind of dabbled in these things in my undergraduate degree, but all I knew was that Schleiermacher was wrong. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like I could tell you why he was wrong. But when I got to seminary and I started to kind of study the context, then I was able to see, oh, wait a minute. Here's what Schleiermacher was trying to do.
Right.
Here's what Schleiermacher was trying to rescue the Christian faith from. And in other words, studying the context helped me to understand Schleiermacher as a human being
Right.
who was actually trying to do something good. Now, at the end
Right.
of the day, do I disagree with how he did it? Yes. But what he was trying to do, I would have been trying to do the same thing,
Mm.
you know? And so I think that's the key is like there was this one of my professors said, you must learn, and this is going to sound terrible,
Mm.
but you must learn to discern the kernel of truth in every heresy.
Mm. You sure you want to keep that in the record? I'm just playing.
Right? It sounds terrible, right?
No, I totally understand it. Yeah. There's a
Because
context that's fair.
right, because if there was no truth in it, nobody would believe it.
Right.
A lie always has just enough truth in it to deceive people.
Mm-hmm.
So, we like to look and say, there's no truth in this at all. No, there's some truth. You look at every controversy around the doctrine of the Trinity. The
Right.
modalists, individuals, who believe in the oneness but not the threeness of God. Well, there's something they were trying to recover, something they were
Right.
trying to preserve in Scripture.
Mm.
And so that's the key. So I think discourse, the concept of just Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers.
Mm.
You know?
Not read that one.
Oh, it's just, I mean, it's just a really, really simple point that he's saying we just lost the ability as a culture to just talk to strangers. And so all we
Mm.
do is we just kind of put people in boxes. Oh, he's a liberal, or he's a conservative, or he's a this, or he's a that. Honestly, I truly believe that a Christian should be neither a liberal nor a conservative.
Okay. I'm glad you said this because
Yeah.
I got two questions I want to ask you.
Yeah. Preach.
Is partisanship part of the problem?
Yep.
Good. I'm glad you said that because I agree.
Yep.
I
100%.
feel like I feel like there is a blind loyalty to a title rather than to the nuance, to what actually matters, the
Yep.
intention.
Yep.
You and I have talked about this a lot. I actually knew your answer already, but you see this a lot in conservative circles.
Right.
It does not matter at all about the candidate as long as they think a certain way about this issue.
Yep.
You see it on both sides, to be quite honest. I
100%.
think I'm more aware of how this, I mean, yes. It's so annoying to me that people can turn a blind eye to things that are painful for other people, but demand that their pain is recognized.
Right. 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 Mm-hmm.
It's such a hypocritical way of living.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much what's the word I'm looking for? Like impassioned, very loud discourse that happens. It's not even discourse, just blasting, and people will remove half of their friends list or, half their followers list over this kind of thing because there's this one issue.
Right.
that someone will think differently about.
Yep.
But they're not seeing, and this is to your point earlier, if you recognize the truth behind the heresy, quote unquote, your relative heresy, then it's easier for you to empathize with their pain
Yep.
and see why do they think about things the way that they think.
Yep.
And partisanship, I think, again, this partisanship is a binary function that can apply to any set of inputs and give you black or white.
Now that
And I
is a
hate
great
that.
analogy. Say that again.
Partisanship is a binary function where you can provide any set of inputs and be returned black or white. And I just disagree with that.
Yep.
I
Because
feel
here's
like the life is in a perpetual quantum state of anywhere between 0 and 1. And the only absolute truth is God.
mm,
But everything here in this earth is somewhere between 0 and 1.
right. Yep. Because I totally agree with you. And because here is foundational to partisanship is this conviction that we got two parties. One of them's good, the other one is evil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know in my heart that the one that's good is not 100% good, but it's definitely better than this one. And so, because it's better than this one, then it has to succeed.
Right.
So, the only way for this to succeed is if I pretend, and everyone in our party pretends, that there's nothing wrong with us.
Right.
It's all them. That every problem in our country is because of them. Poverty is because of them.
It's the mysterious they.
Problems in the economy, it's them.
They want us to.
Problems with law and order, it's them. It's exactly the mysterious they. And so, once again, you lose any sense of nuance. And I believe that the church is called to be prophetic, but you cannot be prophetic and partisan at the same time.
Yeah.
You cannot be prophetic and partisan at the same time.
Wow.
If you're going to be prophetic, you've got to come out from among them and be separate.
Right.
You cannot say, well, I'm a Pharisee. Well, no, I'm a Sadducee. You can't be one or the other. You've got to be of Christ. You got to come out from among
this has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Like that analogy you just drew. This has been around for a long time. Could you, even for my own sake, could you like expound on that analogy and see how maybe that's applied to the way that we think about things today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look at the culture in which Jesus ministers, there's two primary political parties in Israel. The Sadducees were very liberal. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in miracles. The Pharisees were very conservative. They believed in the resurrection. They believed in miracles. The Pharisees were more conservative in terms of their definition of righteousness than the Sadducees were. I mean, they were the conservatives and the liberals of first century Israel. There were two other parties as well, more fringe parties. You don't really hear much about them. One is called the Essenes, and they were separatists. They lived out in the desert and totally, come out from among them and be separate. That was their, they had constant ceremonial washings, whereas the Pharisees, their primary emphasis was righteousness. The Essenes' primary emphasis was holiness. But the fourth political party were the Zealots, and they were the radicals, the extremists, the assassins and and so then you look at Jesus, and it's clear that he studied under one of the Pharisees. He was a disciple of one of the Pharisees. But when he builds his disciples, the group of his disciples, he calls Simon the Zealot, Matthew the tax collector.
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's like he's got this politically eclectic group that he calls together and then says, now you got to love one another as I've loved you. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples, that you love one another. Does that include Matthew the tax collector and Simon the Zealot? I mean, Simon the Zealot probably wanted to cut Matthew's throat.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And we don't know anything about the political backgrounds of the other guys, but it's crazy to me that Jesus intentionally builds into his discipleship community a politically diverse group. And then secondly, that Jesus basically critiques all of them. He critiques the Sadducees. They come to him saying, whose wife will she be on the day of judgment, right? It's a woman who had 7. She was married to the first brother and he died. Then she had the second brother, had a third. All 7 had him. Whose wife will she be on the day of judgment? And Jesus says, you err, knowing neither the scriptures nor the power of God. In the resurrection, that was their question. In the resurrection, they're neither married nor given in marriage. So he critiques the Sadducees. He critiques the Pharisees. You know, the Essenes are out in the desert, so they never even interact with him directly, but he critiques all of them. Actually, some people say John the Baptist might have been an Essene. Possibly. I don't know.
I could see that.
Yeah, very possibly he could have. Because he was in the wilderness at the time of his manifestation to Israel.
Right.
But
so okay,
political side, yeah.
So if you've got this thing that's been going on for millennia, and it was definitely going on before then as well, I'm sure. What is the right way? So, okay, not to put you on the same pedestal as Jesus at all, but Jesus had a platform.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And when Jesus spoke, he often offended people as well. And Jesus was asked very direct political questions. Right? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar. Right? So how can we apply how Jesus carried himself and answered those questions and navigated those waters to your life? I think specifically to get back to your first question about like why you don't feel comfortable talking about politics, but I think more broadly for someone like myself, because this affects me in a lot of different contexts too. There's the church context, there's the workplace context, right? There's my friend circle context, especially my friends that are not believers.
Right.
And I know where they stand on some things.
Right.
I can very easily trigger them and probably lose a relationship.
Right.
I guess to put a more direct question to you, how concerned should I be about losing those relationships? And is there a style that you think exists which allows me to speak to those issues without just like, oh, no, we don't mix work and politics. We don't talk about politics at the dinner table. We don't, right? Like, is there a way that we can actually have discourse? Because if it's not at the dinner table, it's going to be somewhere else. It's probably a lot more violent.
Right.
Like, what can I do? What can you do?
Yeah.
To improve that?
Well, first of all, I think that's an excellent question, but I'd probably start by saying, I don't know that I have the answer to that question because I'm wrestling with it myself. And what I wrestle with inside oftentimes is wanting to speak out on things, but then not wanting to speak out. Like you and I talked about Israel, Palestine.
Yeah.
I want so badly to come out and communicate my perspective on that.
Right.
But then the question is, to what end? Like, and I think for Jesus, he knew his mission. Like he knew what his mission was, and he also knew what his mission wasn't.
Mm,
His mission was not to reform the politics of Israel, and his mission was not to reform the politics of Rome.
mm,
His mission was to give his life as the atoning sacrifice for the sins of the world.
mm,
And on the way there, to create the new community, the body of Christ, the church, to build his church on the rock, and to give them the words that the Father had given him.
mm.
I mean, can you imagine if Jesus confronted the political realities of his day? His gospel today would be largely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because he would have been speaking out on contemporary issues all the time. And those contemporary issues would no longer be relevant today.
Right.
So Jesus, he's thinking thousands of years out. And he's thinking, I'm only going to deal with stuff that's going to be relevant for the next 3,000, for however long it's going to be, you know?
Mhm.
And so I think the key for us is understanding what our mission is.
Right.
Now, with relationships, with unbelievers, I'm careful not to offend my non-believing friends. Why? Because I have a mission to
Right.
reach them for the gospel. And I can't reach them for the gospel if I'm just in your face with what I believe. At the same time, I'm open to discuss with any of them anything, but I'm
Mm.
never going to discuss it in a contentious way because I don't expect them to believe as I believe. They haven't found the treasure in the field.
Right.
And so oftentimes the stuff that we believe is because we found the treasure, and we expect to be able to convince people who haven't found the treasure to buy the field,
Mm.
and it never works. And if they do buy the field, we just made good Pharisees out of them,
Mm.
you know?
But what I hear you saying, I think this is something that I've learned actually in the workplace.
Hmm.
Got a got a big company, you got a bunch of stakeholders, people that are all care about what we're working on.
Hmm.
We all actually have the same goal. But you got people in leadership in different functions that have different ideas about how to go about solving this thing. One of the problems that can happen is a complete disregard or disrespect of the other side and why they think that we should do things a certain way.
Right.
One of the things that the CEO of my current company told me one time, or actually a group of us, was one of the most important things to do when you present an idea
Hmm.
is not to lead with the conclusion, but to lead with the aperture.
Hmm.
From what lens are you looking at this problem? What was important to you when you set out to solve this problem?
Hmm.
I thought that was so powerful because it's a disarming thing when you present an aperture.
Mm-hmm.
It's disarming when you put a framework in front of somebody and force them to process the output through that same framework.
Mm.
You can't hear the framework and then see the conclusion and ignore the framework. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
You're going to start thinking about all the things that led to this way of thinking.
Right.
So leading with an aperture,
Yep.
I think, is really important. And
That's so
that's
good.
somewhat the mission,
Yeah.
right? Oftentimes in life, our aperture is our mission.
Right.
What is my end goal? If my goal is X, then I'm going to carefully consider the next words that come out of my mouth.
Right.
This isn't the right time to say that. This is the right time to say this.
Right.
Right. So a framework is one of the most powerful tools in our bag
Hmm.
when it comes to discourse,
Hmm.
because you're proving your work.
Hmm.
Right. I didn't get a math test and I get this complex function and again just end up with this number and it's like, trust me, bro,
Hmm.
this is right.
Right.
You're proving your work. You're showing your work before you even get to the answer.
That's right. That's good. That's good. Okay, I'm going to say something that's going to sound like
Mm.
a transgression of my own principle.
Going to hell. I'm just playing.
They're going to the devil's hell.
I'm just kidding.
My perspective, maybe my framework, you might say, my aperture. No. My perspective on the political climate in our culture right now, in our country right now, is that by and large, and this is a generalization, but it is not propaganda driven. It's a generalization which sounds like a contradiction of my prior principle. But the reason why I don't see it as a contradiction of my prior principle is because it is not propaganda, meaning the goal of it is not to shape your heart after demonize one perspective so that you can fall wholeheartedly into agreement with the other. By and large, liberals, so the scripture says righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. By and large, liberals prefer justice over righteousness, and conservatives prefer righteousness over justice.
Right.
So if you talk to a conservative about a justice issue and you talk about oppression, they're going to pretend they don't know what you're talking about, by and large, that it doesn't exist, that it's not real. And you're crazy. Oh, you're one of those liberals. But if you talk to a liberal about a righteousness issue in terms of sexuality, gender, they're going to talk to you like you're a bigot.
Right.
You're one of those conservatives. And so conservatives value righteousness, but ignore justice by and large. And liberals, by and large, value justice, but have no concept of righteousness. And so to be a Christian, I've got to value what God values. Righteousness and justice are the foundations of his throne, which means I cannot embrace righteousness and forsake justice. Neither can I embrace justice and forsake righteousness.
Right.
And I think that's the political, if there's a political persuasion that I'm looking for, a kingdom-driven political persuasion, it would have at its foundation righteousness and justice. And what happens is, I've even seen a lot of liberal Christians use justice as a means of ignoring righteousness, or an excuse for ignoring righteousness. In other words, in order to do this justice, to do this justice thing, we can't believe in this righteousness thing anymore. Because believing in this righteousness thing is of itself injustice.
Yes.
And then I've talked to conservatives who have this idea that to do righteousness, we can't think of this justice thing anymore. Because you're talking about justice for people who at their heart are unrighteous. And as soon as you start talking about justice, the first thing a conservative will do is point to the unrighteousness of the people for whom you cry out for justice.
Yeah. I'm laughing because there's so many examples of that come to mind immediately. I won't even bother naming them because it will be it's a hot stoker as soon as you name it, as soon as you label it. But that's absolutely true. And I feel like that's a symptom of a larger problem that we have. I'll personalize this one for you. So in my pursuit of God, when I stumbled, and I've had some terrible things in my life that I've been responsible for. in my pursuit of God, I have labeled myself as evil for a single transgression.
Mm-hmm.
And I go into despair.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a terrible person. The
Mm-hmm.
worst. I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to know God. How could he possibly? I'm disgusting.
Mm.
Like I will start to just the room closes,
Mm.
and in my mind there exists nothing but the evil that I did in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And now my identity is evil.
Mm.
And so I think, and I go both ways on this, but like in my personal assessment of myself, I tend to despise justice for myself
Mm. Mm.
in the pursuit of righteousness.
Mm.
When it comes to others,
Mm.
I think I'm the opposite. I think I tend to very easily say, that's not right. I don't care if this person thinks different. I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, I immediately strive for justice for other people. So like there's an interpersonal dynamic at play where even as I try to apply like righteousness and justice in my own life and way of thinking about myself and other people and loving my neighbor,
Mm.
it's very easy for me to gravitate toward one of those more than the other, rather than holding them in balance. And to me, that creates um, a poisonous system of accountability. You know, it is a system of accountability, but it's poisonous.
Right. I would respond to that. I
Tell me I'm
don't think
wrong,
it's a
brother.
I don't think it's a justice issue.
Mm,
I think it's a righteousness issue. And what I mean by that is in our culture, just as we tend to think of liberal and conservative as monolithic realities, we
mm,
tend to think of righteousness and unrighteousness as static realities.
mm,
You're either righteous or you're unrighteous. And if you're righteous, you're always righteous. And if you're unrighteous, you're always unrighteous. It
mm.
goes back to what we're talking about, how we need to whitewash or
Right.
vilify our political figures. First thing we need to know is, are they righteous or unrighteous? And once we
Mm,
get that in our head, everything they do is either right or wrong. And we think that way about ourselves as well. And we don't
mm,
realize, there's a quote I stumbled upon from A.W. Tozer. And Tozer said that every redeemed man owes his salvation to the fact that in the days of his sinning, God kept the door of mercy open by refusing to count any of his evil actions as final.
mm.
That is, in God's mind, righteousness and unrighteousness are not static realities, they're moments. And when there's a moment of unrighteousness in our lives, God keeps the door of mercy open
Right.
and
Right.
says, that's not the final word on his life or her life.
Wow.
What if we thought that way about people?
Wow.
What if we
Mm,
thought that? What if we thought that way about Donald Trump?
mm,
What if we thought that way about Joe Biden?
mm,
What if we? I
mm.
mean, what if we thought that way about what's the George Santos or what's his name?
Santos, yeah.
George
Santos,
Santos.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
even somebody who both sides of the aisle agree he's a despicable person. But can we keep the door of mercy open in our own hearts, even for him?
Wow.
That unrighteousness is not a static reality.
Mm,
It's a moment. And if God thought the way we thought, he would just kill us all.
right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
if anybody has the right to think that we're living like vermin, it's
Right.
God. You know what I mean? If
Right, you
anybody
just
has,
agreed with yourself. So
I know,
strong.
right? I don't know what.
There
Whoa.
you go. Oh, watch this one. Watch this one. Since we're distracted. Oh, I turned mine off. Hold on. Let's do this.
The heart?
The heart. There it
Whoa.
is. Turn that foolishness off.
Wow.
To me, that feels like it speaks to our proclivity to be judges.
Yep.
It's always time for the verdict in our lives. That's what
right.
we're always like, I need to hit this hammer right now.
Yep.
This gavel was about to strike. I'm making the conclusion.
Yep.
Another topic, maybe for another day.
Yeah.
Is our justice system.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know your thoughts about
our injustice system.
Our injustice system. I know where this one's going. But yeah, that's a thing that I think ties really neatly into this whole thing that we've been speaking to.
Yeah.
I think you just you offered a moment of clarity for me as well, which is these absolutes are so dangerous.
Yep.
They're so dangerous.
Yep.
When the reality is life is less of a solution.
Right.
Right. It's not like the salt perfectly mixed into the water and now it's this homogenous thing.
Right.
If there are things that you can pick out of that.
Right. Right.
I think that is it's a challenge. And I think we are trained early to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We're not really trained to see like heterogeneous, like everything is homogenous in school.
We're not trained to think in terms of nuance.
Yeah.
Everything's black or white.
Yeah. And
once you've determined something's black, it's always black.
Yeah.
Once you determine something's white, it's always white.
It's let's take this even a step further relationally to marriage. Mm. When people say they've fallen out of love, that's one more thing I can point to.
Yep.
And it's so easy for us to just like, you take away the process from things and
yep. We're going to have an episode on marriage. We're going to have to talk about marriage because I think the problem there is that our culture has misdefined love.
Yeah.
And so when we think we've fallen in love, we actually have not.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've actually fallen out of is infatuation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there's a common misconception in our culture that love comes before marriage. You fall in love and then you get married. It's not true. You can't fall in love until you get married and commit yourself for life to someone. Only then do you have the capacity to cultivate love, true love, deep love. And when I hear people say, we fell out of love. No, you did not cultivate true love on the other side of your infatuation. You fell out of infatuation and failed to cultivate true love on the other side of it. So there was nothing left. But that's another one. I got to take my daughter to this quinceañera.
Get out.
Thank you, brother. Oh, I'm not staying. I'm gonna go to the gym. Try to get
on, BB. Thanks for making time to do this one.
Anytime, brother. Have a wonderful day.
Love you.
Thank you. Love you. Have a good day.